emotions. I'm a healthcare provider, so I talk about grief a lot. And now to be on the other side of this is, it's a lot. So I lost my mom a few years ago, and that was hard. This loss, this grief, this pain, it's different. It's insurmountable.
Family of Nolan Wells, they're preparing to lay their 18-year-old son to rest. Wells was found dead on July 6th in the waters off Mississippi's Horn Island, where he'd been celebrating the 4th of July holiday with friends. Now, 2 weeks later, his family is finalizing funeral plans.
There were hundreds of people out there. You've seen the video and the photographs. How somebody did not see him is pretty shocking to me, especially if he left one group that knows him to go with another group that clearly knows him. I don't understand how he got separated from everybody that he knows. It is early. They are actively still talking to people. They are gathering, photographic evidence and video evidence from people that were there. Even if I did not know him, if I'm just taking...
Nolan Wells and 4 of his friends left for Horn Island on July 4th. Only 4 of them came back. Before his body was even found, before his parents could ask him what happened that day, someone accessed his phone. Someone deleted his messages. Someone erased his digital footprint from the one 24-hour window that actually matters. And by the time his family got to see what was on that device, the most important evidence of his final hours had already been wiped clean. What those 4 friends told investigators about Nolan's final conversation doesn't match what the only other witness says he told her. One of them is lying. And tonight we're going to walk through the evidence that might prove who. We're also going to talk about a distress call that was made after Nolan was already gone, a GPS location that overlaps with where his body was found, and a former judge who just issued a public warning about the prosecutor now handling this entire case. But first, we need to talk about what happened in the last 28 hours of Nolan Wells' life, because that timeline is where the contradiction actually begins. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a football player at Southwest Mississippi Community College, a kid his coaches said showed up for his teammates even when he wasn't on the field, a son whose parents have now spent 2 full weeks demanding the truth while planning his funeral. On July 3rd, the night before the trip, Christine Wells made salmon for dinner. Nolan told her he was heading out to spend the night with friends. He said simply, "Hey Mom, I'm about to go. I love you." A hug, a kiss, he left. That was the last ordinary goodbye she ever got to have with her son. The next morning, July 4th, that same group of friends picked Nolan up. We know their names. We know they all got on that boat. What we don't know is which one of them is telling investigators the truth about what happened on that island. At 9:56 that morning, the boat carrying Nolan and those 5 young men left the dock. By 11:14, it reached Horn Island. For several hours, they stayed together, celebrating the holiday. At 4:31 that afternoon, according to the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, that boat left Horn Island. Nolan Wells was not on board. But here's what's crucial. The version of events that those 5 friends gave investigators says Nolan told them he wanted to stay on that island with a girl he'd met. He chose to stay behind. That's their story. But the girl, Katie, tells a completely different story. According to her account relayed through her mother, Nolan told Katie he was getting back on that boat. He was planning to rejoin his friends and leave the island. Not stay, leave. 2 completely contradictory statements about the last words Nolan ever spoke. One of these 5 young men is sitting on a lie about what their friend told them in his final moments on that beach. And they're telling that lie to law enforcement. Now, consider what that means for Nolan's mother. Christine Wells has spent 2 weeks trying to understand how her son ended up in the water, but she can't even figure out which account to trust. Did her son choose to stay on that island, or did he intend to go home? For most parents, that would be a simple question to answer. Not for Christine, not anymore, because one account says her son made a deliberate choice to remain alone on a remote barrier island, and the other says something interrupted him between saying he was leaving and the boat actually pulling away. Something nobody has explained yet. Hit the subscribe button as we continue this case. Turn on notifications, because what we're about to walk through is the evidence that starts to answer that question. The objective. track data that every single witness account can now be measured against. After the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon, it didn't go straight home. It traveled to Fort Bayou, then back to the original dock, then to Fort Bayou again. 4 separate movements recorded automatically by the Department of Marine Resources. GPS data doesn't depend on anyone's memory. It doesn't depend on who's being honest or who's lying. It's generated independently, and that data shows something critical. At some point between leaving Horn Island and those other movements, the boat's occupants made a distress call. NBC News obtained that audio. Listen to what they said. "We're at the west tip of Horn and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking." Those weren't calm words. Those were panic. The boat was taking on water. They needed help immediately. Now, here's where this gets significant. The west tip of Horn Island, the location they called in to the towing service. That's the same general stretch of coastline where Nolan's body was found 2 days later. His parents are looking at that overlap. Investigators are looking at that overlap. And the question nobody can answer is simple. If Nolan intended to leave that island like Katie says, why wasn't he on that boat when it started sinking? Why did that distress call go out without him? Some people will say the overlap means nothing, that it's coincidence, that the boat situation and Nolan's disappearance are completely separate events. Maybe they are, but the fact that nobody can explain the connection, nobody can definitively say why those 2 locations intersect at that exact moment in time, means that question sits there unanswered. And unanswered questions in cases like this don't stay quiet for long. They tend to get louder. They tend to make people wonder. They tend to make parents ask questions their sons' friends can't seem to answer clearly. But there's something else that just entered this case that's raising serious questions about whether this investigation itself can be trusted. A former judge has just issued a public warning about the prosecutor now handling this entire case. This isn't gossip. This isn't speculation. This is a former member of the judiciary saying publicly that there's a documented history of concern about this prosecutor's track record. A former judge doesn't do that lightly. A former judge doesn't put their own credibility on the line unless they believe something is genuinely wrong. So why hasn't that warning gotten more attention? Why isn't every news outlet reporting on the fact that someone with legal authority is questioning whether the right person is even handling this investigation? Think about what that means. Nolan's parents are trying to get answers about their son's death, but they're also now watching a prosecutor that a former judge publicly doesn't trust. That adds another layer to an already impossibly complicated situation for this family. There's also a phone, Nolan's phone, a device that his family has pointed to from the very beginning as evidence that might actually hold real answers. GPS tracking, Snapchat records, messages, a digital footprint that could explain what happened in those final hours. 2 weeks ago, both the prosecution and the family's legal team agreed to something new, a joint inspection. Experts from both sides examining the phone together in real time instead of releasing competing statements afterward. That was 2 weeks ago. As of right now, that phone inspection still hasn't happened. Why? Why would you delay examining the one piece of evidence that could actually answer the central question of this entire case? Is it because they're waiting for something? Is it because the evidence is complicated? Is it because somebody doesn't want what's on that phone to be seen? Nobody's saying, nobody's explaining the delay. Nolan's parents are still waiting. The public is still waiting. And that phone sits somewhere, locked away, holding answers that this family deserves to have. Now let's talk about the young woman at the center of all of this, Katie. For 2 full weeks, her name meant almost nothing to the public. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody heard her voice. Her account only existed in secondhand reports. While the internet chased rumors and viral videos, the one person who might actually resolve this entire contradiction sat almost completely unseen. Think about that. 5 young men have been named, discussed, dissected in detail. The prosecutor has been analyzed. A judge has publicly warned about the prosecutor's integrity. But Katie, the girl whose final conversation with Nolan might be the most important detail in this entire case, has barely been identified at all. Why? Why does the account of 5 young men get repeated constantly while the account of the only other eyewitness stays buried? Why is it that nobody seems interested in pushing Katie's version harder if they believe these 5 friends are lying? Those are the questions that need answers. Those are the curiosities that should make people wonder who's actually fighting for the truth here and who's just trying to control the narrative. Christine Wells, Nolan's mother, has remained remarkably composed through all of this, remarkably focused. While the investigation unfolds, while unanswered questions pile up, while a former judge questions the prosecutor's integrity, she's been doing something no parent should have to do. She's been planning her son's funeral while simultaneously demanding accountability. She's holding grief and advocacy at the exact same time. On Monday morning, she's going to sit in a church in Ocean Springs, the same community that watched Nolan grow up, the same community that celebrated his signing day with college football programs. And she's going to say goodbye to her son, not knowing with any real certainty what his last words actually were. Not knowing why his friend's story contradicts Katie's, not knowing why the phone inspection is delayed, not knowing what the distress call and the GPS overlap actually mean. She's going to do this while a prosecutor she now has reason to question continues investigating her son's death. Think about the extraordinary weight of that. Think about the impossible position that puts a mother in. But here's what Christine has done differently than almost any other family in a case like this. She's refused to let her grief become anger. She's refused to let her demand for justice become a weapon. At every press conference, at every interview, at every public appearance, she's repeated the same request. Any demonstration held in Nolan's name must remain peaceful. Nolan would never want violence associated with his memory. That consistency, that refusal to harden into something angrier despite everything this family has endured, that says something about the kind of person Nolan was and the kind of people his parents actually are. They want answers, they want truth, but they want it done right. They want it done the way their son would have wanted it done. Before we close this update, there's something worth addressing. Two pieces of misinformation spread so widely that they shaped how millions of people understood this case before anyone ever verified them. The first was a photograph supposedly proving Nolan was alive after July 4th. Rolling Stone confirmed through image metadata and a friend's account that the photo was taken a full week before he ever went to Horn Island. The second was a viral video believed by many to capture Nolan in a confrontation moments before he disappeared. The friend who filmed it confirmed directly that the voice on that recording was his own, not Nolan's. Both corrections happened quietly, both were overshadowed by newer theories, both matter for the same reason. In the vacuum created by delayed autopsy results and an investigation that's still gathering evidence, unverified claims move faster than confirmed facts. That pattern has already happened twice in this case. It will probably happen again, so pay attention to what's actually confirmed. Pay attention to what's still just theory. Pay attention to which version of Nolan's final words you're actually choosing to believe and why you're choosing it. Here's what we actually know as of right now. Katie's account contradicts the story given by those 5 young men about Nolan's final conversation, and that contradiction remains unresolved. GPS data shows the boat left without Nolan and later made a distress call at a location that overlaps with where his body was found. A former judge has issued a public warning about the prosecutor handling this case. A joint phone inspection agreed to weeks ago still hasn't happened, and Nolan's family has finalized arrangements for his funeral while simultaneously continuing to demand answers about how he ended up in that water. We're going to keep following this story. When the phone inspection finally happens, we'll tell you what's on it. When the grand jury convenes, we'll break down what happens next. When the autopsy results arrive, we'll bring you those findings verified and not a moment before. This family deserves truth. Nolan deserves truth. And somewhere in Mississippi, a mother is still waiting for someone to give her the one thing she's been asking for since July 4th. The truth about what happened to her son in those final hours on that island. We'll be here when that answer finally comes. Subscribe now so you don't miss it when it does. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time.